They apologized, not because you demanded it, because you gave them no other way to stay in control of the story. If you've spent years hoping for a real apology from a narcissist and gotten nothing but excuses, deflection, or a counter-accusation instead, I want you to understand something up front. Most people never get one, because most people are asking for it the wrong way. A way that actually makes it easier for a narcissist to refuse. What we're covering today is different, and it works specifically because it stops appealing to their conscience, which barely factors into the equation, and instead appeals to something they actually respond to: self-interest and image management. Let's start with why the obvious approaches almost never work, because understanding the failure is what makes the actual method make sense. Most people, when they want an apology from a narcissist, do one of two things. They either confront directly, "You hurt me, you owe me an apology," or they wait, hoping guilt eventually catches up with the narcissist on its own. Both fail for the same underlying reason. They treat the apology as something the narcissist owes you morally, and narcissists, structurally, do not process moral obligation the way most people do. An apology to a healthy person is an act of empathy, genuinely feeling the impact of what they did and wanting to repair it. To a narcissist, an apology is almost always transactional. It's not, "I hurt you and I'm sorry." It's, "What does apologizing get me, and what does refusing to apologize cost me?" That reframe is the entire foundation of everything we're about to cover. Once you stop looking for genuine remorse, which, to be honest with you up front, you may never actually get, even with a perfect approach, and instead focus on making an apology the path of least resistance for their own self-interest, the odds shift dramatically in your favor. So here's the method, broken into specific components, and I'm going to walk through exactly why each piece works. The first component is removing the audience for their defensiveness. Narcissists are far more likely to dig in, deny, and counterattack when there's someone else present who they need to perform for. A friend, a family member, even just the general sense that this conversation might get repeated to someone later. Defensiveness is, in large part, a performance of not being wrong, and performances need an audience to matter. This is why the conversations that actually produce something close to an apology tend to happen one-on-one, in private, with no witnesses and, ideally, no phones recording, because the absence of an audience removes the incentive to win the interaction rather than resolve it. The second component is dropping the emotional charge entirely before you even start. This is genuinely counterintuitive, because when someone hurts you, the instinct is to let them see how much it hurt. Surely, you think, if they see the pain clearly enough, they'll finally understand. In practice, with a narcissist, visible emotional pain does something different than what you're hoping for. It often gets interpreted, consciously or not, as a vulnerability to exploit or a scene to manage rather than a wound to repair. Going into the conversation calm, matter-of-fact, almost clinical in tone, removes their ability to reframe you as too emotional or overreacting, which is one of their most reliable deflection tools. You are not performing calm to hide your feelings. You are choosing calm because it's strategically the only tone that doesn't hand them an exit. The third component, and this is the one that actually does the heavy lifting, is presenting the situation in a way that makes an apology the version of events that makes them look best, rather than a concession that makes them look weak. This sounds manipulative, and I want to be honest with you. It is a form of strategic framing, but it's framing in service of getting you something you're owed from someone who won't give it to you through honesty alone. Here's what it sounds like in practice. Instead of, "You really hurt me when you said that, and I need you to understand how much it affected me," which centers your pain, something they're poorly equipped to sit with, you say something closer to, "I know that's not actually who you want to be in this relationship. I know you don't want to be someone who talks to people that way." Notice what this does. It doesn't attack their character. It offers them a version of themselves they'd prefer to believe in, and frames the apology not as admitting fault, but as confirming that you're actually the better person this implies you already are. Narcissists are often far more motivated by protecting a flattering self-image than by any genuine desire to repair harm. So give the apology a doorway that lets them walk through it while still holding on to that image, rather than one that requires them to demolish it first. The fourth component is specificity without accusation. Vague statements like, "You're always so dismissive," invite a vague defense and an easy, "That's not true." Specific, factual statements. "On Tuesday, when I told you I was stressed about work, you said I was being dramatic and walked out of the room," are much harder to argue with because they're not a character judgment, they're a description of an observable event. And critically, deliver this without the loaded adjectives that give them something to push back on. Not, "You were cruel." Just what happened, plainly, like you're reading it off a timeline. The fifth component, and this is the one people find hardest to execute, is offering a specific, low-cost exit. Most people, when asking for an apology, leave it open-ended. "I need you to understand what you did," which is actually enormous and vague and gives a narcissist nothing concrete to do. Instead, name the exact thing that would count as resolution. "I just need to hear you say that wasn't fair to me." One sentence. Something achievable in 5 seconds, not an extended process of accountability that feels, to them, bottomless and threatening. The smaller and more specific the ask, the more likely they are to actually do it, because it doesn't feel like the beginning of an unlimited reckoning. It feels like a task they can complete and then be done with. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because I don't want this episode to oversell what's actually happening when this method works. What you often get, even when it works exactly as designed, is not the apology you actually wanted underneath all of this. The one where they truly understand the impact, feel real remorse, and change their behavior going forward. What you often get is a strategically extracted concession, delivered because it was the path of least resistance in that specific moment, not because something shifted in their capacity for empathy. Sometimes that's genuinely enough. Sometimes hearing the words, even knowing how you got them, provides real closure. And sometimes it isn't enough, and getting the words makes the absence of real change even more obvious and more painful, because now there's no ambiguity left to hope into. In part 2, we're going to walk through exactly how this conversation unfolds in real time, word for word, including what to do when they deflect right in the middle of it, why the apology you get this way often comes with a hidden expiration date, and the honest answer to the question underneath this entire episode. If you have to engineer an apology this carefully, what does that actually tell you about the relationship you're in? Stick around, because that last part might be the most important thing in this whole 2-part episode. Let's finish it, because how this conversation actually plays out in real time is where the theory either holds or falls apart. Picture the moment itself. You've picked a private setting, no audience, no phones out. You're calm, not performing calm, but genuinely regulated because you did the work beforehand to lower your own emotional charge before walking in. You open with the specific, factual version of what happened. No loaded language. "On Tuesday, when I told you I was stressed about work, you said I was being dramatic and walked out of the room." You pause. You let it sit, without rushing to fill the silence with more explanation. Here's what typically happens next, and I want to walk you through the most common deflections, because knowing them in advance is what lets you stay on track instead of getting pulled into a different conversation entirely. The first deflection is minimization. "I don't even remember that," or "That wasn't as big a deal as you're making it." Don't argue the size of it. Don't escalate into a debate about whether it was significant. Simply return to the specific ask, exactly as planned. "I just need to hear that it wasn't fair to me." Same words, calm tone, no elaboration. This is the same broken record principle from earlier episodes, and it works here for the same reason. You're not trying to win a debate about magnitude. You're holding a request open until it gets answered. The second deflection is counter-accusation. Well, you do the same thing to me, or reaching back for an unrelated grievance from months ago to redirect the conversation entirely. This is one of the most common exits a narcissist will reach for, because it changes the subject from their behavior to yours. And if you follow them there, you've lost the thread completely. The move is to acknowledge without engaging. That might be true, and we can talk about that separately. Right now, I'm asking about Tuesday. Then return to the ask again. The third deflection, and this one is more subtle, is the fauxpology. I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry if that upset you. This sounds like an apology on the surface, and a lot of people accept it because it contains the word sorry and they're exhausted from asking. But notice what it actually does. It locates the problem in your reaction rather than in their behavior. It's an apology for your feelings, not for their actions. When this happens, gently but clearly redirect. I appreciate that, but what I need to hear is that what you did wasn't fair, not that I felt bad about it. This distinction matters enormously because accepting a faux apology as the real thing teaches them that the low-effort version works, and you'll get nothing but that version going forward. If you get through these deflections and they do offer the actual sentence, you're right, that wasn't fair to you. Let it land without immediately softening it with reassurance. A lot of people, the second they get what they asked for, rush to comfort the narcissist afterward. It's okay. I know you didn't mean it. I love you. Resist that instinct, at least in the moment. Let the apology exist on its own for a beat before you decide what to do with the relationship going forward. You don't owe them immediate absolution just because they said the words. Now, about the expiration date, because I promised you honesty about this, and I meant it. An apology extracted through careful framing in a single, well-managed conversation is not the same as an apology that emerges from someone actually sitting with what they did and choosing, unprompted, to change. What you often get with this method is real in the sense that the words were genuinely said, genuinely meant in that specific moment, but it's frequently disconnected from any deeper shift in how they see you or how they'll treat you next time they're frustrated, tired, or feel their control slipping again. This is why so many people who use this method successfully describe a strange, hollow feeling afterward, even when it worked exactly as designed. They got the sentence. The dynamic underneath it, the one that produced the hurtful behavior in the first place, is usually still fully intact, unexamined, and waiting to produce the same behavior again under similar pressure. This isn't a reason not to use the method. Sometimes hearing the words, even knowing exactly how you got them, provides something real. Validation that you weren't imagining what happened. A small moment of being right instead of gaslit. That has value. But I don't want you walking away from this episode thinking a well-executed conversation is a repair strategy for the relationship as a whole. It's a tool for a specific moment, not a solution for a pattern. Which brings us to the question I said we'd end on, because I think it's actually the most important thing in this entire two-part episode. If you have to engineer an apology this carefully, managing the setting, controlling your tone, framing their ego just right, offering them a face-saving exit, anticipating and countering 3 separate deflection tactics. What does that tell you about the relationship you're actually in? I want you to sit with that honestly, because in a relationship without narcissistic dynamics, none of this is necessary. You just say what hurt you, and a person who loves you and has a normal capacity for empathy takes it in, feels bad, and says sorry, imperfectly maybe, but genuinely. The fact that getting an apology from this person requires a strategy, a script, careful management of their ego and your own tone, that complexity is not neutral information. It's a direct measurement of how much genuine repair capacity actually exists in this relationship And it's usually a much clearer answer than anything they'll ever say to you directly. That doesn't mean you have to leave. Some people read this and decide the relationship is still worth it to them for their own reasons, with their eyes fully open about what they're working with. Others read it and realize the amount of engineering required is itself the answer they'd been avoiding. Either way, I'd rather you know clearly what you're actually navigating than keep hoping the next conversation might finally be the one where it doesn't take this much effort just to be heard. If this episode gave you the words to finally get something you've been chasing for a long time, I hope it lands the way you needed it to. And if you walk away from it with more clarity about the relationship itself than about the apology, that's just as valuable, maybe more. If you want more of this, real, usable psychology, not just theory, subscribe to Mind Horizon. I'll see you in the next one.